Welcome back to IDP Plus Trends for our last IDP Plus ranking show. It is week 17. Congratulations if you're here. You're probably in a championship matchup somewhere, and you're here one last time to get a leg up on your opponent, which we will do. Real quick, I will not be doing a show in week 18, but if you do have a league, if you have a start sit question you want to ask me, go ahead and drop it in this video right here next week. I will get the alert and I will get your question answered for you in week 18. I just won't have a video on it. So thank you, to all those viewers and listeners who continue to support, who are subscribed to IDP Plus. Right now, I'm going to add the IDP Plus rankings that you see behind me for all of those who can view the screen. We are going to get into our defensive lineman top 15 rankings right now, brought to us by Justin Fry at JFryDP on Twitter. Let's take a look here at his top 15. Number 1, he's got Micah Parsons. Number 2, Myles Garrett. Number 3, Trey Hendrickson, sack leader in the NFL. Number 4, Danielle Hunter. 5, Nick Bosa. 6, TJ Watt. 7, Will Anderson Jr. 8, Josh Hines Allen. 9, Chris Jones. He's questionable right now. 10, Andrew Van Ginkel. 11, Greg Rousseau. 12, Jared Verse. 13, Jonathan Grenard. 14, Brian Burns. And 15, our cheat code at the position, Christian Ellis. So moving up to the top of the list here, Micah Parsons, the shoe-in at number 1. Big game last week in Week 16 versus Tampa Bay. 5 tackles and a sack with a forced fumble as well. Week 17, he's going to get the best matchup you could ask for as far as tackles go in Philadelphia. They allow the most tackles to defensive linemen, just over 20 a game. Micah Parsons, on top of that, has had 6.5 sacks over his last 5 games with 20 tackles. So basically, he's averaging 4 tackles a game and over a sack. You cannot ask more than that. That's going to get him the number 1 spot, like it does right now. We might not even see Jalen Hurts in this game. Micah Parsons may have a better chance to get a sack right off the bat. We might have, if Hurts doesn't get through this protocol, we might have Kenny Pickett. If he's even healthy, it might be a third string quarterback. So this Philadelphia Dallas game is actually going to be a lot closer than we expect given the teams. But Micah Parsons, nonetheless, great opportunity to get you 4 or 5 tackles and another sack here. So unanimous number 1. Moving on to number 2, Myles Garrett, 3 tackles and a sack versus Cincinnati. Tough matchup last week for him, especially in the tackles department. But he did excel in that given matchup with 3 tackles with a sack as well. On top of that, Garrett has had 5 sacks in his last 5 games with 18 tackles. So not exactly Micah Parsons, pace, but he is averaging over 3 tackles and a sack per game. So another guy, elite status. Of course, Myles Garrett isn't going to get as many tackles as Micah Parsons, but Myles Garrett can rack up the sacks just like Parsons, and that's what you're looking for in this matchup versus Miami in Week 17. Miami isn't a great tackles matchup for the defensive lineman position. They only allow 12 tackles per game over their last 3, which is pretty rough. But Tua has been sacked 8 times in the last 4 games, albeit none last week versus San Francisco. Nick Bosa and the boys could not get to Tua, but still 8 sacks in the last 4 games. So take it as you will. On one hand, he didn't get sacked last week. On the other hand, he got sacked 8 times in 3 games before that. So maybe a good opportunity for Myles Garrett to notch another sack here versus Miami. Number 3, Trey Hendrickson, who I mentioned leads the NFL in sacks with 13.5. 3 tackles and a sack last week. Perfect game. If you started him, he did you right. Trey Hendrickson, what we've noticed is he's kind of a sack or die play. If he doesn't get you a sack, he probably hurts you. Only averages 2.5 tackles on the season per game. Week 17, he's going to play Denver. And Denver has only allowed 3 sacks in the last 3 games for Bo Nix. So only 1 per game, not looking great or odds to get a sack here based on those numbers. But it is Trey Henderson. He leads the league in sacks for a reason. He's only played 15 games, and he has 13.5 sacks. So tremendous pace there. Trey Hendrickson, if you have him, he got you here. You probably got to roll him out hopefully he gets that sack. I don't think it's too out of the question here. Bo Nix, I think, as well as he is scrambling, he's still prone to get sacked from time to time. And Trey Hendrickson, there's nobody better to do it than the guy who's leading the league. So don't overthink this one. Trey Hendrickson, start him out there. He could have a game where he gets 3 or 4 sacks. Very unlikely in this matchup, but he could get a sack and maybe get you a couple tackles. Not too many guys out there that can do that, that you can just pick up at the drop of a hat. So Trey Hendrickson's already on your team. Start him with confidence. Hope for the best. Number 4, Danielle Hunter, down game last week. Only 2 sacks versus Kansas City in a good matchup. As far as tackles go, should have had more tackles, but 2, he burned us last week. Not looking good for this week. But week 17, speaking of this week, he's going to get Baltimore, who allow the 6th most tackles per game. And if we're looking for sacks here, Lamar has been sacked 6 times over the last 4 games. So Danielle Hunter, although he did not get one, actually the whole team, Houston did not get a sack on Mahomes last week. They're looking to break that mold. And Danielle Hunter, again, a guy who's a walking bomb, could rack up 8 tackles and 2 sacks in any given game. So you probably want to start him too, even though he burned you last week. You're still in it. You're still alive. Give him his redemption. Number 5, Nick Bosa. Soft game last week, 4 tackles with a tackle for loss versus Miami. Looked a bit rusty. The snaps were there, though, 84%. That's about his average this week. Week 17, he's going to get Detroit, who's top 3 in as far as tackles allowed to the defensive linemen with 19.8. So that's encouraging that we'll have that nice tackle floor. But as far as getting sacks, Goff has only been sacked 6 times in the last 4 games, and actually 3 of those 6 were in one game versus Buffalo, week 15. So on one hand, Jared Goff can be sacked multiple times in any given game, which is kind on the heart to hear. But at the same time, he's had 6 sacks in 4 games. In one of those games, he had 3. So if we take that game away, really he's had 3 sacks over the last 3 games, and that's only an average of 1. So depends on how you look at it. Me personally, I don't think Lions are going to give up many sacks in this game. I don't think they do in many games overall. So that's the side I'm going to lean on. And Nick Bosa, it's tough because he hasn't gotten a sack in his return yet in these 2 games. But one thing I noticed is Nick Bosa has provided us at least with a safer tackle floor. And Nick Bosa is a top 5 defensive lineman. Again, you can find guys out there who can get you 4 tackles, but not the sack potential that Nick Bosa has. So especially if you're in a sack heavy league, you're getting 5-6 points a sack. Yeah, you probably don't want to pass up on this opportunity. The potential that Nick Bosa carries in week to week. So again, a guy who got you here. Unless you have somebody a really strong play, Ashawn Robinson, and you're in a tackles heavy league, you're going to start Nick Bosa. Number 6, T.J. Watt, only 4 tackles, no sacks versus Baltimore, which was a disappointing game. He's had 17 sacks in 15 games before this game, week 16. So he's a good track record against Baltimore, but it didn't happen this week, this time. Week 17, he's going to get Kansas City, though, which is a good matchup as far as tackles go. They allow the 4th most tackles to defensive linemen, just over 17. Now, Houston last week only got 1 sack versus Kansas City. So Patrick Mahomes was hobbled in that game, we know. And even though they only got 1 sack on Mahomes last week, Mahomes was sacked 9 times the last 4 games. So there is promise here. I expect Pittsburgh to be down in this game. Maybe Mahomes is going to be on the field more than usual, and which would give T.J. Watt more chances to rush the quarterback. And C.J. Stroud, is as good as he is. He's been sacked, I believe, the 2nd most times next to Caleb Williams. So good matchup here as far as tackles and ability to get a sack to a sack-prone quarterback. T.J. Watt, you're not going to take him out in championship matchups. Set it and forget it with this one. Next guy, Will Anderson, you're going to have to make a tough choice. Again, same guy like Danielle Hunter, same team. Same box score, 2 tackles versus Kansas City. He's had 3 sacks and 7 tackles over the last 4 games. So a guy you're not looking at and banking tackles by any means. You're playing Will Anderson for the prowess of sacks. He's had 10 and a half sacks and 34 tackles over 12 games. So almost getting a sack per game, but only not even getting 3 tackles per game. So tackle heavy leagues, we're not seriously considering Will Anderson Jr., but if we're looking for sacks, that's a different story. Can rack them up in bunches, just like his counterpart, Daniel Hunter, just like Trey Hendrickson, another guy who I mentioned before. And keep in mind, again, with this matchup versus Baltimore, they allowed the 6th most tackles, and Lamar has been sacked 6 times over the last 4 games. So take it as you will. I think it's not a shoe-in matchup. Again, if you have an Ashawn Robinson, maybe you want to start him in a tackles heavy league over Will Anderson Jr. Will Anderson could get those 3 sacks any given game, but this is championship week. We want to make bankable points here. Next is Josh Hines Allen at 8. A light box score for him, 2 tackles, no sacks versus Las Vegas. Only 4 tackles over the last 2 games, so he's kind of trending down. Week 17 versus Tennessee is a middle of the pack matchup as far as tackles go. Mason Rudolph, keep in mind, is the quarterback now. He's only been sacked 1 time over this last 5.5 quarters he's played. Indianapolis and Cincinnati were the 2 games who Rudolph has played against, and Jacksonville has even less sacks than them. So if Indianapolis and Cincinnati couldn't get to Mason Rudolph, or they only did 1 time, how is Jacksonville? That's what I'm wondering here. So Josh Hines Allen, yeah, he has huge upside. But again, if you have an Ashawn Robinson, even DJ Wanham, players like that who are more fringe, aren't the household names, I might take those over a Will Anderson or over a Josh Hines Allen in this case, because again, this is a championship matchup. I don't really like to take risks here. I like bankable points, and I think those guys offer more bankable points, even though maybe not as high of an upside. Moving on to number 6, we have Chris Jones, who I mentioned is questionable with a calf injury. Did hurt it last week. Is likely to play on the more likely side to play than not. But still, keep in mind, he was limited last week. He only had 2 tackles versus Houston. This week, in Week 17, he's going to get Pittsburgh, which is a great matchup. They allow the most tackles to defensive linemen, split with Philly with 20.2. And Baltimore had 3 sacks versus Pittsburgh, and Wilson has given up 8 sacks over the last 4 games. So I think Chris Jones, if he's able to play, if he's at full strength, there's a good opportunity he's able to get not only get going in the run stop game, and get tackles, but also get a sack too. Russell Wilson, 8 sacks over the last 4 games. I mentioned before, I expect Pittsburgh to be down in this game. I expect Russell Wilson to be sacked at least 2 times. So Chris Jones, the only problem is he's getting a lot of attention. Karlaftis, Mike Dana haven't really done much to really support Chris Jones. So really a lot of attention is on him. But hopefully we can get maybe 3 or 4 tackles and a sack and get a nice week here out of Chris Jones, especially in leagues where you need to start a defensive tackle. Number 10, Andrew Van Ginkel. This is a guy who we're absolutely starting if we have him. 5 tackles, 2 sacks, and 2 tackles for loss versus Seattle, and that was a down matchup. He's going to get a great matchup this week. Top 5 versus Green Bay. They allow 18.5 tackles per game. Overall, Van Ginkel's had 69 tackles, 11 sacks, 2 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and 2 touchdowns. We will not talk about another player on this list, nor have we, that has had more tackles and sacks than Andrew Van Ginkel. Of course, he doesn't lead the league in sacks, but nobody has 11 or more sacks with 69 tackles in the defensive lineman position. So really a unique player. If you have him, you're starting him, no doubt about it. It doesn't matter the matchup. He showed us he can excel even in bad matchups. Number 11, Greg Russo, 4 tackles and a forced fumble in Week 16 versus New England in a good matchup. Again, another player who's hit or miss, high upside. A fun stat about Greg Russo, every game he's had a sack, he's had at least 4 or more tackles. So, again, what I mean by hit or miss is not really a high floor tackle guy, but when he gets that games where he gets those sacks, the tackles are there, 4 or 5 tackles. So, Greg Russo, if he can get that sack and get those 3 or 4 tackles, he might as well be Michael Parsons, just with a different name. So you can get a guy here outside the top 10 that has that upside, that has that kind of safe floor as long as he gets a sack. So Greg Russo, good play here. He's going to get the Jets. I'm sorry, he got the Jets in Week 16, which was a decent matchup. Um, no, he is going to get the Jets in Week 16. Aaron Rodgers has been sacked 7 times in his last 4 games, even though the Rams only got to him 1 time last game. So really, Aaron Rodgers has been sacked 6 times in the last 3 games. So that's an average of 2. That'll play. I expect Buffalo to be on the field a lot in this game, but I do expect Jets, when they're on the field, to be throwing the ball and be down in this game, which helps Greg Russo get that sack. So Greg Russo coming in at number 11 here. Number 12 is going to be Jared Verse. 5 tackles and a fumble recovered Week 16 versus the Jets. In a decent matchup. He gets a little bit better matchup this week, Week 17 versus Arizona. They allow 19 tackles per game over their last 3. Jared Verse, keep in mind, has not had a sack over the last 6 games. Kyler Murray has only been sacked 6 times over the last 4 games and only 26 sacks in all of his 15 games. That's just under an average of 1.73. So Kyler Murray's not even getting sacked twice a game on average. So not really a great matchup for Jared Verse to get his sack here. But we're not here really for the sacks with Jared Verse. We're here for tackle-heavy leagues. And he's done that well. Over the last 6 games, he's had 26 tackles. That's an average of 4.3. So that'll do. That'll check the box. So Jared Verse, again, if you're looking for sacks, don't count on it with him, but is somebody that can have a safe floor for you as far as tackles go. 13, Jonathan Grenard, 3 tackles and a tackle for loss, Week 16 versus Seattle in a bad matchup. He at least saved face, gave us some points. But the last 4 before Week 16, we can throw an asterisk at this game because, like I said, those last 4 games coming into last week, he had 18 tackles, 4 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 6 tackles for loss, and 3 quarterback hits in those 4 games. Just last game was a bad matchup, wrong place, wrong time. Heck, Jonathan Grenard might be the highest scoring defensive lineman in your league. I know I'm in 3 leagues on Yahoo defensive lineman, tackle heavy leagues. He is the highest scoring defensive lineman of any player, owned or unowned. So Jonathan Grenard, keep an eye on him, especially if he's out there. He might be. I think this is a good week to play him. Just keep in mind, as far as the tackles go, Green Bay is a top 5 matchup as far as tackles. But Jordan Love does not take many sacks. He's actually only been sacked 11 times in 15 games. So Jonathan Grenard, again, great opportunity to rack up the tackles, but it's going to be tough for him to get a sack. So, don't be jaded. Go into it and knowing, the odds aren't good for Love getting sacked. Only 11 times in 15 games. I can't believe that. But that's the status quo we are in. But Jonathan Grenard, nonetheless, can have a big game at any given time. Bad matchup or good matchup. Number 14, Brian Burns had 2 tackles and a tackle for loss versus Atlanta last week. 11 tackles, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, a forced fumble, and a pass defense over the last 4 games. So he's been rather active, not really in the tackle department, but really everything else. Tackles for loss, he's averaging 1 a game. He's averaging half a sack over the last 4 games. So Brian Burns, solid player. More of a safer floor and not really as high of an upside as some of these guys. But again, that's what we're looking for in the finals. We're looking for somebody that can get us 8 to 10 points. We're not going for 20 or 0. Like I did that last week with Nick Benito. He had sacks in 3 or 4 straight games, and then had 2 tackles only last week. So he burned me. Don't get burned. Last but not least, Christian Ellis, our cheat code of the position. He is a linebacker, inside linebacker, but he may have defensive lineman eligibility, so he may be out there. He's a little bit, like I said, a cheat code of the position. 7 tackles and a pass defense in Week 16 versus Buffalo in a good matchup. This week he's going to get a slight downgrade in the matchup. He's going to get the Chargers, but he does have 25 tackles over the last 5 games, albeit no sacks. So Again, if you roster Ellis, you're going to throw him out there. Understand that, there's a very low percent chance he's going to get a sack, but the tackle for it does seem to be solid, even though he's not playing 100% of snaps. He's just playing about above over 50%. So Christian Ellis, that of course that number can always go up, can always go down. That's the risk we take. But as it stands right now, that's about his average snap, and he gets about 4 or 5 tackles a game. So 25 tackles over the last 5. That's a clean average of 5. If he can do that this week, he's going to be a lot better than players that you're chasing sacks with. All right, so that wraps it up for our top 15. Now I have some honorable mentions that I want to say that I think could be top 15 plays, even though they're not on the list. Number 1 is going to be Chop Robinson. 3 tackles, 2.5 sacks over his last 2 games. This week, Chop's going to get he's going to get Cleveland. And Cleveland, as we know, just got decimated this past week by Cincinnati. I think this is, a number 1 defense in fantasy to pick up Miami. And Chop Robinson, 2.5 sacks over his last 2 games. A good chance to add to that this week. I'm going to stay in Miami for another pick, and that's Zach Sealer. He's had 4 tackles and a sack last week versus San Francisco. Over the last 3 games, more importantly, 10 tackles and 4.5 sacks. So Zach Sealer, a good safe floor and high upside play. Next is Nolan Smith, who had 3 tackles and a sack with 2 fumble recoveries versus Washington. So a big game in the box score from Nolan Smith. Last 3 games, Nolan's had 16 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 17, he's going to get Dallas in a good spot. So I think Nolan Smith, since Brandon Graham's retired, he's came in and balled. Not only somebody who can get sacks, but also has a safe tackle floor, about 3 tackles a game. So if he can get a sack in 3 tackles, he's a great play this week. So if you have Nolan Smith, maybe a guy you're thinking of starting over Will Anderson this week, I wouldn't call you crazy. So keep him in mind. Number 4, Cam Hayward's been absolutely on a tear, even in his old age. 6 tackles and a tackle for loss versus Baltimore. Cam Hayward, most importantly, 5 or more tackles in his last 6 games with 3 sacks. So remember how I talked about Micah Parsons getting 4 or more sacks. Cam Hayward is passing that, even though the sacks are not as consistent. So Cam Hayward, if you're in a tackle city league, great play, top 15 upside. Alex Highsmith, again, sticking in Pittsburgh. 4 tackles and a sack last week. Also had a forced fumble versus Baltimore. He's had a sack in his last 3 games with 15 tackles. So a sack and 5 tackles. Boom. Even better than Parsons over the last 3 games. I'm not saying he's better to play than Parsons, but I do think he has just as high as upside as Parsons, baby. So I like Alex Highsmith a lot. And finally, in those tackle-heavy leagues, another guy is DeForest Buckner. 5 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a pass defense last week versus Tennessee. He's had 22 tackles and 3 sacks over the last 4 games, which is tremendous. Just over 5 tackles a game and 3/4 of a sack average. So these are all fine plays. Chop Robinson, Zach Sealer, Nolan Smith, Cam Hayward, Alex Highsmith, and DeForest Buckner for your championship matchups. So right now we're going to move into our linebackers rankings. So I'm going to hover over rankings, go to weekly, and click on weekly LB to get my week 17 linebackers ready. So first and foremost on this list, number 1 is Zach Bond. Number 2 is Zaire Franklin. 3, Zach Bond's teammate, Nakobe Dean. Number 4, Jamian Sherwood. 5, Caden Ellis. 6, Roquan Smith. 7, Diane Henley. 8, Eric Kendricks. Number 9, EJ Speed. 10, Jordan Brooks. 11, making his return, Fred Warner. 12, Patrick Queen. 13, Christian Roseboom. 14, Levante David. And 15, Demario Davis. So going back to the top here, Zach Bond. Great game last week, 11 tackles, 2 tackles for loss with a forced fumble versus Washington. Zach Bond is third in the NFL with 144 tackles right now, only behind Buda Baker and Zaire Franklin. Over his last 4 games, Bonds had 40 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, and 2 forced fumbles. So anytime a linebacker can average 10 tackles, he's going to be an LB1. He's going to be in the top 8 at least, and Zach Bond is number 1 here. Him and Nakobe Dean have been a smash duo. Actually, have proven to be better than Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. And this week they're going to get a great matchup versus Dallas, who's top 10 in tackles allowed to opposing linebackers with 17.5. So Zach Bond he did have a top 10 matchup last week versus Washington, made well on it with 11 tackles. I expect him to rack up close to or even double-digit tackles this week for your championship matchups. Number 2 is going to be Zaire Franklin. Let us down last week. 7 tackles, his second lowest marker of the year. He did have 1 game with 5 tackles. This one was versus Tennessee, and that was kind of a juicy matchup, but game flow screwed that game up. So I'm willing to chalk this one up, throw an asterisk next to it. Um, Keep in mind in this game, Jalen Carlies was playing for the injured Speed, and EJ Speed might have messed up his knee, the same knee that he did before earlier in the season. So Jalen Carlies might be somebody that is actually worth rostering this week. I'll talk about him a little bit later, but keep that in mind. And I don't know if that threw off the cadence of Zaire Franklin. I don't think it did. I just think that this was a product of game flow and a wacky game in general. You know, if you watch that Indianapolis and Tennessee comeback game. So, again, Zaire Franklin, not worried about him, leads the NFL with 151 tackles. Week 17, he's going to play the Giants, which is not really a great matchup. I'm kind of worried about that. They only allow 14 tackles per game over the last 3 games, 2 linebackers. Not a great high number there. Usually you'd want to see that about 16, 17 is a good number. We're down to 14 tackles a game. And keep in mind, Zaire Franklin's got to split that with whoever he plays with. So not saying, just because they give up an average of 14, they can give up 20 this game. And Zaire and EJ both have 10. But, the fact that they're only giving up 14 a game and we're looking for Zaire to get 10 of those, well, somebody else got to eat too, whether it's Corliss or Speed. So that's a little bit concerning, but Zaire Franklin is, somebody who can pop off any given game. Just depends on game flow. So don't overthink it. Keep him in there. It doesn't matter who he's playing next to. They're a great stream, but Zaire Franklin is a great number 2 linebacker here for your championship week. Number 3, Nakobe Dean, 12 tackles versus Washington in Week 16. He's had 10 or more tackles in 4 games this year. And he's going to get Dallas this week. Again, a top 10 matchup, allowing 17.5 tackles per game to linebackers. I expect him to make it 5 games with double-digit tackles. So Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond, both top 3 in this list. Number 4, Jamien Sherwood, 8 tackles versus the Rams, and that was a medium. I call it a mid-grade matchup. I thought Rams would have ran over the Jets. It was 19-9. I thought it was going to be 29-9, and Jamien Sherwood was going to be on the field a lot. Turned out the Jets were on the field a lot, which screwed up Sherwood's potential. But he did finish with 8 tackles, so that's a solid number for us. And if he can get another 8 tackles this week, we'll be happy. Keep in mind, people that are a little bit burnt, maybe upset on him. Game flow screwed this game up. We thought Sherwood was going to be on the field a lot more than he was, so I'm not really worried about him too much, especially when you look at Quincy Williams. He's only getting I believe 10 tackles his last 4 games. So 10 tackles his last 3 games. So Quincy Williams, he's just getting 3 tackles a game at this point. There's no C.J. Mosley. Jamien Sherwood is in a fine matchup versus Buffalo Week 17. I know they're going to be on the field a lot, so don't overthink it. Don't say that there's somebody out there who got 20 points last week and they're going to do it this week. Jamien Sherwood is your guy. He's a poor man's Zaire Franklin, and he's not too far behind him at all. And I expect him to have at least an 8 tackle floor. So Sherwood, I'm not willing to budge in my rankings. He's LB1. If he got me here, I'm not going to second guess it. He's a walking bomb. Number 5, Caden Ellis has been on a tear, 7 tackles and a sack with a forced fumble versus the Giants last week. He's had a sack in 4 straight games as well as 33 tackles. So a little bit under 10 average, but uh, getting a sack, 4 straight games. There's not linebackers out there that can do that. So Caden Ellis, we're not worried about Nate Landman taking tackles away. What's his name? Troy Anderson's on IR. This is the Caden Ellis show, and he's going to get a top 10 matchup versus Washington, allowing 17.5 tackles to the linebackers per game. And like I mentioned, Caden Ellis, 4 straight games to tackle, almost averaging 10. You can't really find that. I didn't think he had this upside in him. I thought he was a solid, competent, LB2, but no, he's in the LB1 rankings for a reason. Caden Ellis is going to get you 14 to 16 points in tackle heavy leagues if you're getting 2 points a solo tackle. So can't ask for much better than that. Next is number 6, Roquan Smith, who had 10 tackles versus Pittsburgh in a juicy matchup. He's had, in his last 3 games, 26 tackles and a half a sack. So that's a nice average of over 8 tackles. He's had he's going to get a bottom 8 matchup versus Houston this week. They only allow 14.8 tackles per game, which is why I have Roquan a little bit lower. Roquan isn't to me, he isn't what he has been in years past. He does absolutely have those spike games where he has double-digit tackles. He did last week versus Pittsburgh, albeit the best matchup you could ask for. Now he's going to get a bad matchup. Um, Last week versus Houston, Kansas City's linebackers did not get many tackles. I believe 15 collectively, but their breadwinner, Nick Bolton, I think only had 4 tackles or 5 tackles. So I'm a little bit concerned here in Roquan. Not too far to drop him out of my top 8. Not too concerned to have a huge question about, can I start him? I do think he's a fine start. Game flow might be a question here. I expect Baltimore to be up in this game and on the field majority, which would not be in the best regards of Roquan Smith. Take that with a grain of salt, but Roquan Smith, he does offer that huge upside, seems to have a safe floor, but there are some cracks in the foundation. We've seen some single-digit weeks out of Roquan, which is very uncharacteristic. So there's great linebackers here. Even the guy I'm going to mention next, Diane Henley. If you prefer to have Diane Henley over Roquan Smith right now, I don't blame you. 10 tackles last week versus Denver, who was a bottom 5 matchup coming into that week. But Henley broke the mold. 10 tackles with a tackle for loss. He's had 10 or more tackles. I don't think we can find another linebacker that we can say this about. Henley has had 10 or more tackles in the last 8 out of 9 games he's played. And one of those, the one game he did not hit that marker, 10 or more, he had 8 tackles. So I can't begin to tell you how valuable. You already know how valuable Henley has become in IDP, and he very easily could be a top 5 pick this week. Top number 5 in the top 5 spot. So number 7 might be a little bit light here for Diane Henley, but anybody in this top 8, you're starting with confidence, and Henley is absolutely of that character. Again, last 8 out of 9 games, 10 or more tackles. You can't find many more linebackers to do it better than that. So Henley is absolutely in a smash spot versus New England. This is a top 3 matchup. New England gives up over 18 tackles per game to linebackers, which makes for a perfect storm here for Diane Henley. I could see him finishing inside the top 5 this week. So love him. Love the next guy if he plays. Eric Kendricks, he did not play in Week 16 versus Tampa Bay. Week 17, if he does, he's going to get the best matchup he could ask for in Philadelphia. Not the best matchup, but they are top 8. They allow 17.8 tackles to opposing linebackers. And Kendricks has been extremely productive this year. We all know that. In only 14 games played, 124 tackles, which is a little bit under that 10 average, but still almost there. He's had 3 sacks, 2 picks, and 3 forced fumbles in those 14 games played. So not somebody who just has to get the tackles to make his day. Absolutely capable of making splash plays. And Eric Kendricks, if he's starting this week, I don't think he's limited. I think he played 100%, and it's a good matchup. I think a lot of Saquon Barkley will be used, Eric Kendricks is going to get 8 to 10 tackles this week should he play. I'm worried about the next guy playing too. Mentioned him. EJ Speed, number 9, did not play with a knee injury versus Tennessee. Is this the same knee? I'm starting to wonder. Is the injury he had in the middle of the season? Now we look at a guy named Jalen Carlies who came in with 10 tackles on 98% snaps. So EJ Speed, he is number 9 in my books if he plays. He's going to get 100% snaps if he plays. Just the big question is he going to play? Now, if he is out, I would not exactly, replace number 9 EJ Speed with his replacement Jalen Carlies. I'd say Jalen Carlies is a top 25 play, no doubt, and absolutely is a cheat code because he, on Yahoo at least, has defensive back eligibility, which makes him a great play there. But I don't think I would put him at number 9. I think he, like I said, inside my top 25 for Carlies if Speed does not play. But if Speed plays, number 9, you got you here. Any linebacker that suits up for Indianapolis gets tackles, whether that's Speed, whether that's Carlies. So whichever one it is, it's a fine start this week, actually. Number 10, Jordan Brooks, another guy who was injured, left the game. At least he played, but 7 tackles and a sack versus San Francisco. And coincidentally, it was on the game where he had his season low in snaps at 77%. So really excelled. Jordan Brooks, no surprise to us. He's been very productive this whole season. This week, week 17, he's going to get Cleveland, which is a middle of the matchup road. I don't expect Cleveland to be competitive in this game, so I am a little bit worried about game script, but Jordan Brooks can get sacks, can get forced fumbles. We're not totally dependent on the tackles here, and he's proven that he can get tackles, rack them up in bad matchups. So Jordan Brooks, somebody who's your 14 to 16 piece. You can't really ask much more than that. So don't ever think it. If he starts, you start him. Number 11 is going to be Fred Warner, who I said makes his return back to the list. Got in my good graces after an 11 tackle performance versus Miami last week. On top of that, last 2 weeks he's been Fred Warner of the old. 26 tackles and a tackle for loss. A nice average of 13 tackles a game. That'll play. He's got a juicy top 3 matchup versus Detroit this week. They're third as far as tackles given up to linebackers with 18.2. So all the cards are right here for Fred Warner. We've seen the proof is in the pudding the last 2 weeks. I'm willing to forgive Fred Warner and put him inside my top 12 here. Number 12, Patrick Queen. 8 tackles last week. Pass defense versus Baltimore. He's had 38 tackles and 2 passes defensed over his last 4 games, just under that 10 tackle a game average, which is excellent. Week 17, he's going to get Kansas City, which is a top 8 matchup. They allow 17.5 tackles per game to linebackers. And he's had, on top of everything I've just said, Patrick Queen, 4 games with double-digit tackles, and 2 of those have come in the last 3 games. Just the last game, week 16, it wasn't double digits. Only had 8, so fell too short. But, hey, 8 tackles, you're going to take that too. It was a little bit disappointing. It was a revenge game. Patrick Queen played in Baltimore versus the Ravens. I expect him to get double-digit tackles. He fell a little bit short, but even if he gets 8 tackles this week, that's a fine floor. He still has the 10 tackle potential, but expect about 8 tackles. And if you get more, consider that a pleasant surprise. Number 13, Christian Roseboom, 8 tackles versus the Jets last week, and that was a bad matchup. Game flow made it a little bit better for Roseboom, which helped him save the day with 8 tackles. Only 2 of those were solos, and we've seen that before out of Christian Roseboom. But if he can get 10 tackles, we're not going to really nickel and dime him about how many were solo and how many were assists. Still an impressive feat, very elite feat. Troy Reeder is not a concern. He's still on IR, so Christian Roseboom is the linebacker of choice. Omar Spates down to 55% snaps, so I'm not really worried about him taking snaps, replacing Christian Roseboom. This looks like maybe he's not exactly the player of the future, but he's Mr. Right now. So Christian Roseboom is a fine start. Maybe in week 7 wouldn't be number 13 on the list, but when we need 10 or 12 points in the championship matchup, Christian Roseboom comes in at number 13. He's had 37 tackles over his last 3 games. Week 17 versus Arizona. That's his matchup this week. That's the fourth best matchup you could ask for versus Arizona. They give up 18.1 tackles to the linebackers. Big caveat here, ladies and gentlemen. Christian Roseboom is going to be a great play, top 15 play if James Conner plays. If James Conner does not play, I kind of move Christian Roseboom maybe to 18, 20. I still think he's a fine play if you're in a deeper league and you need a second or third linebacker. Of course, you're going to take that chance, even in a bad, not bad matchup, but of course they're not going to run the ball as much if they don't have James Conner, and of course there's a good chance in this game that the Cardinals will be down to the Rams. So at that point, they'll have to throw the ball more. But nonetheless, I still expect Christian Roseboom, as long as James Conner is active, I expect him to be a great start. So start Roseboom with confidence. Just check that inactives and active list. Now, next is number 14, Lavonte David versus Carolina this week. He's been productive on his groove. The old vet, 8 tackles last week with 2 tackles for loss versus Dallas. He's had over his last 4 games 35 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, and a fumble recovery. So not only coming close to that 10 tackle game average, he's also almost averaging a sack. He's averaging a tackle for loss and some other additional splash plays. Help Lavonte keep up in this top 15. Week 13, he played Carolina already. In that game, he had 8 sacks, so it was a 6-2 spread, 6 solos, 2 assists. That'll work. If you can give me 8 tackles and 6 of them are solos this week, Lavonte, I'll take that. That's about 14 points in my book, so that'll fly. And I think Carolina has been a better matchup since they played in Week 13. I know Bryce Young has taken some steps back, but hopefully they can sustain drives. And Chuba Hubbard looked really good last week. They ended up winning that game versus Arizona. Almost ended up losing it, but Chuba Hubbard looked tremendous in that game. Hopefully they can dump the ball off to him a good bit. Right now as it stands, I'm not sure if Xavier Legette's going to play. Maybe that keeps things more inside than outside. So Lavonte David, bottom line is solid LB2, high ceiling, 24-point ceiling. He can get sacks, he can get splash plays. So somebody we definitely want to start in not only tackle heavy leagues, but really all types of scoring leagues. Lavonte David is valid in. So top 15 still, even though he's aging at this point. Next guy, another wonder of time, Demario Davis, the older man, 10 tackles last week and a tackle for loss versus Green Bay. I know the defense was on the field awfully a lot, but this was no fluke. 32 tackles over the last 3 games for Demario Davis. He's been sizzling, averaging over 10 tackles in that span. Week 17, he's going to play Las Vegas, which is not really a great matchup to opposing linebackers. Their bottom third matchup. But in this game, I do expect it to be close. I expect the Saints defense to be on the field a good bit as well in this game. I don't think that the Las Vegas is good as Green Bay, but I do think the Saints look bad. So with that being said, Las Vegas, I know they're not a great team. Maybe they're not able to afford to run the ball all game. I know that's probably what they'd like to do. Las Vegas runs the ball a lot when they can. They don't give up many tackles to safeties. Things are usually to defensive linemen or to linebackers. That's usually where the plays happen when it comes to Las Vegas. So a lot of passes to Brock Bowers here. That's probably in the middle of the field. Demario Davis might get some extra tackles there. Nonetheless, averaging over 10 tackles the last 3 games. And this matchup's not a killer. It's not a great matchup, but it's not a horrible matchup. So Demario Davis, I think you can pencil him in for a solid 8 tackles, an 8 tackle floor this week, and maybe you get surprised with a double-digit piece. So that number 15, Demario Davis, wraps up the linebackers, but I did bring some honorable mentions to the table. And these guys, let me just tell you, I'm very passionate about. I know I just put top 15 out here. These guys could definitely have top 15 upside. I have a hard time not ranking them in my top 15, especially the first 3. The first one being Blake Cashman, 12 tackles last week with a tackle for loss and a pass defense versus Seattle. And the most important thing is that was in a horrible matchup. Seattle does not give many tackles to opposing linebackers, but he did have 12 in that game. Blake Cashman, furthermore, has been on a tear over the last 4 games with 38 tackles, just under that 10 tackle average. And he's going to play Green Bay. He's not playing Seattle anymore. He excelled versus Seattle. I can't wait to see what he does versus Green Bay. Green Bay is top 12 in allowing tackles to the linebackers. They average almost 17 tackles given up to opposing linebackers. So there's plenty of volume. We don't have Ivan Pace. The next linebacker playing next to Cashman is Kamu Grugier-Hill, and I think his high has been like 4 or 5 tackles on the season. So, 16.9 tackles in this matchup. That's Green Bay's average. If that's the case, I'd say 12 of them, 11 or 12, are going to Cashman. So Cashman's been extremely productive. If you have a hunch on him versus somebody in this list, him over Christian Roseboom, that's fine. I understand it. Blake Cashman's going to be a solid play. He's going to get you 10 to 12 points, and that's all we can ask for here, with a high floor as well. So Blake Cashman, even though outside the top 15, not far from it. Great play. Another guy who's right behind him, Kaiser White, who had 8 tackles and a sack versus Carolina in a bad matchup last week. So he excelled. Versus the Rams this week, they give up 18.3 tackles per game to linebackers over the last 3 games. So Rams have been trending up. They're a good matchup. Hopefully we see a bunch of Kyron Williams in this game. If you're a Kaiser White owner, plenty of opportunities for tackles. The last 4 games, Kaiser White, we kind of saw him fall off in the middle of the season, but the last 4 games, 39 tackles and 2 sacks. So been extremely productive. Kaiser White, this is a game. Even though he's been a little shaky this year, you want to start him. Number 3 on my list, I have 5 total here. 3 is Christian Harris, who had 7 tackles and a sack versus Kansas City. He's got another juicy top 8 matchup versus I have Kansas City, but that can't be. No, it's Pittsburgh. No, Baltimore. He's got another juicy top 8 matchup versus Baltimore. And Christian Harris has had, since he's returned and played 2 games from injury, that was his debut. He's had, I think it was a knee injury in the preseason. Wasn't able to play until 2 weeks ago. But so he's played under 2 games at this point. He did not play a full complementary of snaps the first game. So we're going to call it under 2 games. But he's totaled 17 tackles and a sack. So that's an average of 8.5 tackles and a half a sack per game. That's tremendous. And Christian Harris, I believe, did play 97% snaps last week. We are not going to see Azeez Al-Shaair this week. So Christian Harris and Henry 2020 are the guys there. I might actually like Christian Harris more than Henry 2020. So like him a lot this week. He's a volume tackler. We saw at the tail end of last year. He had double-digit games multiple times towards the end of the last year. Let's mess around and find out with Christian Harris. Number 4 is Jordan Hicks. 9 tackles versus Cincinnati. Boy, I'm bringing out these old guns this year, man. Jordan Hicks, ageless wonder, tremendous volume tackler. Reminds me of just not even a style play, just the age and abilities of like a Eric Kendricks. So what could have been if Hicks went to Dallas. But yeah, Hicks has been fine here when he's healthy in Cleveland. Yeah, the Browns. 9 tackles versus Cincinnati. That kind of confused me. I hate when those two teams play each other. Tremendous game last week. 9 tackles versus Cincinnati. Furthermore, Jordan Hicks over the last 4 games has had 35 tackles, so averaging right around that 10 piece. He's got a top 5 matchup versus Miami, who allow 18 tackles to opposing linebackers. So this is a juicy matchup. No JOK in this matchup. Jordan Hicks is the majority, the breadwinner, playing close to 100% of snaps. So we expect him to get 8 tackles this week versus Miami. Especially Miami's going to run the ball down their throat. I expect them to be up. Miami, we think, is the number 1 defensive play of the week. Cleveland looked horrendous last week. So if that's the case, I think Jordan Hicks is a very good sleeper play. Somebody who's not really high up in rankings right now, but deserves to be. And finally, number 5, Cody Barton. I haven't mentioned him much. He kind of fell off. You never know if he's going to have 5 assisted tackles and 2 solos, or 5 solos and 2 assisted. Tough to gauge Cody Barton, but he, again, got his 7 tackles last week with a tackle for loss versus the Chargers. He's had a solid 29 tackles and a half a sack over the last 4 games. So he's averaging over 7 tackles over those last 4 games. Cincinnati is giving up 19.3 tackles over the last 3 games, which is tremendous. That's a top 8 mark. Hicks just had 9 against, who was it against? Jordan Hicks last week. He played Cincinnati. He had 9 tackles against Cincinnati. Now Cody Barton's coming to play Cleveland. So I expect, Cody Barton is going to play Cincinnati, and I expect a heavy dose of Chase Brown in this game. I think Cincinnati's up in this game, so they can maybe afford to, even if they're not up but close in the game, they can afford to run. I expect a lot of handoffs and dump offs to Chase Brown. So I think Cody Barton, this is a great matchup for him. Hasn't really been somebody we've talked about recently, but I think if you're looking for that 12 to 14 points, Cody Barton can offer that this week for you in your championship matchup. So again, Blake Cashman, these are my honorable mentions: Blake Cashman, Kaiser White, Christian Harris, Jordan Hicks, and Cody Barton. Now we're going to move to our last position, last of the year, baby, defensive backs. And the linebackers were fun. The defensive linemen were fun. The defensive backs was a crapshoot this week. Hopefully you have somebody in the 2 guys in the top 10 and you don't have to make any tough decisions. But even making these rankings, I had to make some tough decisions. Number 1 is going to stay Budda Baker. Number 2, Kevin Byard. Number 3, Brian Branch. 4, Brandon Jones. 5, Deshaun Elliott. 6, Nick Cross. 7, Kyle Hamilton. 8, Jordan Battle. 9, DeMonte. Oh, no, DeMonte Kazee is not supposed to be in there. Duplicate 8s. Number 9, Julian Love. Number 10, Jonathan Owens. Hot take. 11, Kyle Duggar. 12, Derwin James. 13, Grant Delpit. 14, Josh Metellus. And 15, Taylor Rapp, DeMar Hamlin, Cole Bishop, one of the above. We'll get to that in a minute. We'll start off at the top with number 1, Budda Baker, who let us down last week. But we're still here, which means we made it despite the odds stacked against us from Budda. Budda, listen, you got to look at the matchup. That's why I'm here talking about these, how many tackles allowed per game to each position is important. Budda Baker, we knew was going to have a bad matchup last week versus Carolina. I actually do a betting show, IDP Plus Bets. Me and Axton, Axman, IDP on Twitter, we do a betting show, and I had Budda Baker. His line was set for assisted tackles this week at 2.5, and Budda Baker, I believe, hit that in 12 out of 14 games, so that's why I took it. I knew it was going to be a struggle to get there, and he just cleared it. I believe he actually might have had 4 assisted tackles, so I knew it was going to be a ticky-tacky game there, and you might want to check out the betting show if you're a bettor and you like to bet on defensive tackle props like I do. Check out my show. But Budda Baker, yeah, I'm putting an asterisk next to his name. It was a bad matchup. I expect him to do return to form. He's still number 1 tackler as far as defensive back, still number 2 in the league in tackles, and that's everybody included. So almost outpacing Zaire Franklin as a defensive back. So Budda Baker is not moving anywhere, especially when he gets a matchup versus the Rams. That's a top 8 matchup. They allow over 14 tackles per game to opposing safeties. And like I said, Budda Baker, second in tackles as a defensive back. You're not going to overthink that, even with a bad taste in your mouth. So Budda Baker, we'll keep him at number 1. Number 2, I'm looking for solid 12 to 14 points. If you can't give me that, you can't be in these rankings. Kevin Byard can do that, and that's why he's number 2. Kevin Byard, I don't think you'll find him on any other consensus rankings as a number 2, but I'm sticking my neck out for him. 7 tackles with a tackle for loss versus Detroit last week. In the last 4 games, Kevin Byard has had 28 tackles, nice clean average of 7, with a tackle for loss and 3 passes defensed. Another reason why he's number 2 for me is he's got a top 5 matchup versus Seattle. Seattle has given up an outstanding 20.3 tackles to safeties over the last 3 games. Again, take your 12 to 14 points. Don't go looking at Damari Richardson. And I know it's tempting. The guy gets 2 games, 2 starts with double-digit tackles, then gets 6 tackles and a pick this week. Don't do it. Maybe if you're looking at somebody on this list who's at 25 versus Damari Richardson, I understand that. But Kevin Byard is just too consistent. Maybe he does not have the upside as Damani Richardson or other safeties, but don't get tantalized with the upside. Look at the floor. And to me, like I said, that's why Kevin Byard's this high. He has a very safe floor, averaging over 7 tackles a game. Elijah Hicks, one of the safeties, the other starting safety in Chicago, is out. So it looks like it is going to be. We know that Kevin Byard is going to most likely play 100% of snaps, but he's going to be next to Jonathan Owens again. They've seemed to be gelling well, and he's averaging over 7 tackles a game. So you really can't ask much more than that. Kevin Byard does have blow-up games as well, is a good playmaker, so don't count him off as just a tackles guy. He gets past defense, tackles for loss. So Kevin Byard, I have him above the next guy, which I'm sure a lot of consensus rankings have Brian Branch maybe at number 2 or maybe even number 1 after the last 2 weeks he's had. But yeah, Brian Branch, to me, I have him down to 3. And I understand, huge upside. He's had 26 tackles over the last 2 games, 12 tackles last week versus Chicago with a tackle for loss and a pass defense. On top of that, Brian Branch has got a juicy top 3 matchup versus San Francisco. They give up 15 tackles per game to safeties. So the storm is right with Brian Branch. And I actually had him at number 12 last week because my whole justification is we can't really bank on that. He played Green Bay twice and had 6 points, only 3 tackles in both of those games. So, not somebody who's matchup proof. So Brian Branch can absolutely have 12 to 15 tackles, but he can also burn you with 6. Just keep that in mind. Again, if he got you this far, he's been trending right in the last 2 games. He's in a great matchup here. I'm more than fine with throwing him out there, but I just can't call him number 1 because he does have some limitations, some cracks in the foundation there. But love Brian Branch. He's my number 3 this week. You're starting him if you got him. Number 4, Brandon Jones from Denver. Going to play Cincinnati this week. He had a tremendous 10-tackle game last week versus the Chargers, which was the most impressive part to me. The Chargers were a bottom 3 matchup as far as tackles allowed to opposing safeties. So Brandon Jones, if he can do it versus Denver, he can do it versus anybody. Furthermore, he's had 19 tackles over his last 3 games, over 6. That's an average of over 6 a game. Again, juicy matchup. This is a top 10 matchup this week versus Cincinnati. They allow 20.3, which is leading the league over the last 3 weeks. So you go from, Chargers, they're under 12 tackles per game to safeties. Now we're going to play now we're going to play Cincinnati, who is allowing 6 more tackles a game on average. So great matchup here. Brandon Jones, he's been rolling these last couple weeks. Throw him out there again. Start him with confidence. Nobody's safe. No defensive backs are safe. I'll admit that. But if we're looking for one that has the highest, chances, one of the highest odds to be safe, Brandon Jones fits that mold. So he slides up to number 4 here. Number 5, Deshaun Elliott did not play the last 2 games, but still in my top 5. Week 14, he had 13 tackles. That was the last time we had seen Deshaun Elliott on only 88% of snaps. And I know Deshaun Elliott's snaps were fluctuating in the middle of the year. He is healthy. He has no injury tag. He is going to play today on Christmas for us. So Deshaun Elliott, just a huge upside. And even only playing 88% that Week 14 game, he had 13 tackles. So it was absolutely a walking bomb. Weeks 12, 13, and 14, that 3-game span, he had 30 tackles combined. So he was averaging 10 tackles a game. We've seen him make big splash plays, interceptions, forced fumbles. So Deshaun Elliott got a top 12 matchup. He's a top 5 play to me. They're going to play Kansas City today. Kansas City allows 13.6 tackles per game to the opposing safeties, which isn't top notch, but it's a solid number. Upper half of the league. Next is going to be Nick Cross from Indianapolis. Here he is, Nick Cross. You're probably wondering how far he's going to slide down, and I think you can make a good case for him to slide down even further. Now, Nick Cross, we all know, 1 tackle and 1 pass defense. That's it in Week 16. He burned us, but again, we're still here, so we got by. That was against Tennessee, the worst matchup you could ask for. So take it with a grain of salt. Nick Cross, I'm sticking up for you here. But furthermore, Nick Cross is not doing himself any favors because not only did he have a poor game last week, he's only had 6 combined tackles over the last 3 games. So we're wondering what is going on here with Nick Cross. Snaps are still at 100%. You'd probably think any matchup is better than Tennessee, right? I told you they were dead last in tackles given up to safeties. Well, Week 17, Nick Cross is going to play the Giants, and actually they've been worse over the last 3 games. The Giants have only allowed 8.3 tackles to opposing safeties. 2 of them, not just 1 safety, opposing safeties. The Giants have only allowed 8.3 tackles over their an average of over their last 3 games. So that is horrid. I am scared here for Nick Cross. If you told me he was playing a top 5 matchup, I'd probably have him at number 3 and say, start him with confidence. The snaps are there, not a concern. I don't think his role changed. I really don't see a kicker as to why the production has been down. But I can tell you about last week, it was the worst matchup you could ask for. I don't think the opposing safeties who are going to play Tennessee this week will do well themselves. So Nick Cross, even if you're not, if you throw an asterisk on this one, you can't just say he's number 2. There are definitely cracks in the foundation, and it starts with the bad track record, the bad trending in the bad way over the last 3 weeks, and then a tough matchup this week. So Nick Cross, I still think is what we saw weeks 1 through 15. That's who he is, and I wish it was a good matchup because I'd have more confidence in him. And chances are, if you're in a deep league, you got to start Nick Cross. But if you have the Jonathan Owens out there, if you have somebody and you need 10 to 12 points, and you're not trying to risk the 0, then I think those players would be a better option. If that's what your gut is telling you, take your safe points and hit the road, Jack. Number 7 is Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton had a nice game last week, 8 tackles, a forced fumble, and a pass defense versus Pittsburgh. That was a good matchup for him, of course. He's had 14 tackles over the last 2 games, which is a nice average of 7. Check. That'll pay the bills. That'll get it done. Week 17, he's got a matchup versus Houston, and this is twofold. On one hand, Houston has given up the 5th most tackles on average per game to safeties, but they have given up only 10 tackles to safeties over the last 3 games. So I'm not exactly sure what the 5th spot is. That might have them at like 14 or 15 tackles allowed to safeties, but over the last 3, they're down to 10. So something's changing in Houston. I'm not sure what the Tank Dell injury is going to do. Of course, that wasn't over the last 3 weeks reflected in that. We just lost Tank Dell this week, so we're not going to know the results of that. But Kyle Hamilton, nonetheless, I think this is a game where Baltimore is going to be up. Houston's going to need to come back from behind. Even though we lost Tank Dell, I expect to see a lot of throws from C.J. Stroud, and I think Kyle Hamilton again is not somebody who is the most consistent player. He does have huge upside, but he seems to have cemented his floor a little bit with these 2 games with an average of 7 tackles, and I think it's a fine matchup. I mean, like I said, I expect a lot of throws from C.J. Stroud. Kyle Hamilton did well last week in a bad matchup. I think he can do even better here, but just be aware, Houston. You look at it and you say they've given up the 5th most tackles to opposing safeties. They have over the season, just not over the last 3. So be a little bit wary of that. That's why he's down to number 7 on my list. Moving on to number 8, Jordan Battle. I definitely have him higher than consensus. I don't see why there's a reason not to have him inside the top 20. Does scare me a little bit because of his box score. He's had 2 20-point games the last 2 games. One of those was with the fumble recovery and an interception. One of those games was with a fumble recovery, and the other one was with an interception. So These aren't just like clean games with tackles. He had to get the other stats to make the 20 points. Keep that in mind. But as it stands, Jordan Battle, let's take a look at last week. He had 7 tackles and an interception versus Cleveland. That's a tremendous game. 17 tackles and a fumble recovery. Also an interception over the last 2 games. So there you go. Over the last 2 games, averaging 8.5 tackles, half a forced fumble. I'm sorry, half a fumble return, if that's such a thing, and half a pick. So pretty good splits there for Jordan Battle. He's got a top 5 matchup versus Denver this week. Denver is allowing 14.8 tackles to opposing safeties. So I think all that is a perfect storm for Jordan Battle. If he did it in worse matchups the last 2 weeks, I think he can do it this week in Denver. And actually, Denver has cooled down a little bit. They're top 5 as far as tackles allowed to safeties. But they have, in their last 3, have trended down and given more tackles to opposing linebackers. So a little bit of a trend switch there, but I still expect this to be a good game. Cincinnati's going to be throwing the ball. I expect it to be a high scoring game. At least Bo Nix is going to have to try to keep up, which is good for Jordan Battle. So I think, there's guys out here that are lower on this list in the 15 place that I really can't bank on as much as I think I can bank on Jordan Battle. And I'm not talking 20 points. I'm talking 10 to 12 here. And if you can do that, you're in my top 10 rankings for the championship week. That's all I need. I'll win my matchup with my quarterbacks, with my wide receivers, with my depth on offense. I'm not trying to win it or lose it with a defensive back. I don't think that's a good strategy here. Number 9, Julian Love. I love this guy. Talk about him every week. Been penciled in my top 15. He's not going to escape it this last week, but he does slide down. One big thing I will say about Julian Love is he needs, I believe, 22 tackles in these next 2 games to get his 3rd consecutive season for 120 tackles. Now, he's going to be hungry, and he's got a good matchup this week versus Chicago, but that's a tall task, 22 tackles in 2 games. So if he's going to do it, then he's going to be a heck of a play these next 2 weeks. But, yeah, I mean, he's the numbers have trended down. The tackles per game have trended down. Last week in a horrible matchup versus Minnesota, he had his worst game of the season. In the box score, only 2 tackles and 1 pass defensed. And I'm willing to throw a grain of salt on that. That's a bad matchup versus Minnesota. I really don't like to start defensive backs against Minnesota, even though I did start Julian Love in the league last week and he burnt me. But he's got a much better matchup, like I'd mentioned, week 17 versus Chicago. They give up 14.7 tackles over the last 3 games to opposing safeties. So a good matchup here for Julian Love. Way better matchup than last week versus Minnesota. And again, a guy who, he has 17, 20-point upside, and he's got a pretty safe floor. So there's not many other options below him that are going to offer you as much, high risk and not too much, high reward and not too much risk. I like Julian Love here a lot. Still a top 10 for me, no doubt about it. So if you have somebody who you're stuck on, hey, should I start Damani Richardson over Julian Love? Just hit me up and I'll let you know what I think. Especially as we get closer. This is right now where I'm recording this on a Wednesday. It's 6 in the morning in Pittsburgh on Wednesday. I'm recording this. So we have a lot of time for a lot of these games. A lot of them won't be played till the weekend. So trying to get this early out for everyone to have a good information going into the week. Number 10 is Jonathan Owens, who I'd mentioned is a hot take. I don't think you'll find any rankings where Jonathan Owens is inside the top 20, let alone the top 10, but here he is. Jonathan Owens, just the consistency. And there's a couple things that made Jonathan Owens spring up to a top 10 play. First off, you look at the last 4 games. Jonathan Owens has played not only a majority of snaps, but he started, I believe, 3 of those games. 29 tackles, an interception, tackle for loss, 2 pass defenses over those last 4 games. So that's a nice average he's averaging over 7 tackles a game, and he can throw some splash plays. We saw him get a touchdown earlier in the season. It wasn't in those last 4 games, but yeah, Jonathan Owens, as soon as he came to the starting lineup, at least for fantasy, was an immediate spark plug. And I know he's somebody on Twitter that, like Cody Barton, gets ripped apart. He can't really cover, and his chase. What do you call it? His pursuit is bad. I'm not really worried about that. That doesn't really show up in fantasy. If he can play 100% of snaps or close to it, that's the big kicker here, and I do expect him to do it. My big hesitation with Owens this whole time has been, what about Elijah Hicks? He's been a starter when Brisker was hurt. He was starting in place of him. And when he got healthy, was he going to start in place of Owens? Well, last week, Hicks did make a return. He played, I believe it was 30, maybe 35, 36% of snaps. Owens played the rest. But Hicks re-aggravated his ankle injury. So that, as of right now, makes Jonathan Owens look like a very promising defensive back this weekend. Hicks did not practice the first two practices of this week. I think if Jonathan Owens, if we see him start this game and there's no Hicks is ruled out, I think Jonathan Owens is a solid top 10 play, and I think he's very underranked right now. I really don't like to take a lot of risk, and somebody who last week was outside my top 25 generally would be considered a risk. But if you can tell me Jonathan Owens is going to start and play 100% of snaps, I know he's going to get 7 or 8 tackles, and there's not many guys above him or below him that can do that. So Jonathan Owens will be on my team starting as a flyer if Elijah Hicks is deemed out, and I think he should do the same. Number 11 is Kyle Duggar, made a resurgence this year. Last game, 8 tackles in a tackle for loss versus Buffalo. Was a great matchup. We expected Kyle Duggar to do well. I had him in the top 15. Over this last 4 games, 32 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a pass defense. So that's a nice average of 8 tackles a game over the last 4. Kyle Duggar is like a linebacker playing safety. I expected a lot of balls to be thrown his way in the Buffalo game, and that was the case. 8 tackles, tremendous. He is going to get a much worse matchup versus the Chargers. A bad on-paper matchup, I should say. They're bottom 5. Keep in mind, though, last week, as much as I say on paper, it's a bad matchup, Brandon Jones broke the mold. So LA Chargers were giving up a bottom 5. I believe it was under 14 or under 13 tackles per game. But last week I mentioned Brandon Jones versus the Chargers had 10 tackles. So, maybe there's opportunity here for a guy like Kyle Duggar. And maybe if it was a Julian Love, somebody a little bit more inconsistent, a Derwin James, somebody more inconsistent, I'd be a little bit hesitant over. But when we look at Kyle Duggar is very consistent, bad matchups, good matchups. He's a high volume tackler, and you really don't see that too often from the safety position. So he's battled through injury this whole season. I expect him, if he's questionable, I expect him to continue to play. And like I said, Brandon Jones hit 10 tackles in last week versus the Chargers. Maybe the matchup's not so bad after all. So Kyle Duggar, I'm willing to try him out, kick the tires this week because I don't think there's many good options below. Number 12, Derwin James. 5 tackles versus Denver last week was a good matchup. I expected him to do better, but he did not. Only 5 tackles. He gets a better matchup this week versus New England. New England has given up 16.7 tackles over their last 3 games to opposing defensive backs. Last 4 games, Derwin's had 23 tackles, a sack, 4 tackles for loss, interception, and a pass defense. So even though the tackles average is not good, just under 6 tackles a game on those last 4 games, he's been able to rack up plenty of counting stats, whether it be sacks, interceptions, tackles for loss. So that's Derwin James we know, and this is a good matchup. I love this matchup versus New England. New England, like I said, is trending up against safeties. Drake May is getting more comfortable. He's throwing the ball more. So this is not the same New England team we've seen earlier on. This is a matured and refined team. So Derwin James, I think this is actually a good matchup for him. Last week we'll tell you, don't play him, but instead of looking behind, let's look forward and be real. And there's not many better options than a veteran Derwin James who's rolling right now. Getting these splash plays. So any given game, Derwin can get 8 to 10 tackles, and he might just get a sack too. So you don't want to miss out on that. And again, you really don't find anyone with a higher upside and safer floor. So Derwin James at 12. Moving on to 13 is going to be Grant Delpit. Got his first sack of the season last week with 5 tackles versus Cincinnati. Week 17, he's going to get Miami, who is the second best matchup you could ask for as a safety as far as tackles go. They give up 15 and a half tackles per game to safeties. Grant Delpit has had 26 tackles and a sack over his last 4 games, so just over 6 tackles a game. Pretty solid stuff. You know Grant Delpit by now. He's going to get you 10 to 12 points. That's it. Don't look for 20. It's not going to happen. If you want 10 to 12 points and to win it with your offense or other positions, I think Grant Delpit's your guy. So maybe in week 7, he's not number 13 on my list, but really when we need 10 points here, I don't have 20 guys or 10 guys I can say off the top of my head. Grant Delpit's going to slide up a little bit. So if you're starting him, I know it's not the sexiest start, but there's a lot of risks that people will take. Don't put yourself in that position. Take his 10 or 12 and move on. Number 14, Josh Metellus. 7 tackles, although 2 solos and 5 assists were a little discouraging versus Seattle in a great matchup last week. Week 17, he's going to play Green Bay, which is a lesser of a matchup. Still middle of the road, not horrible. Josh Metellus has had 34 tackles over his last 4 games. He's been incredibly productive, almost eight tackles a game there, or a little bit more than 8 tackles a game with 34. So Josh Metellus over those last 4 has been on a heater. I know that Harrison Smith is questionable to play, but we're kind of hoping that Harrison Smith does play because last game Harrison Smith did not play, and actually Josh Metellus had his lowest tackle output out of those last 4 games. So we're kind of hoping that, like I said, that Harrison Smith does play and he gets back to his old ways. Metellus can go back to whatever role he was playing with Harrison Smith there, and he can get 8 to 10 tackles for us. 15, last but not least, Taylor Rapp, and I have in parentheses Damar Hamlin and Cole Bishop. So simply stated, whichever one of these guys plays, I'm going to put at 15. And actually, if you told me Taylor Rapp was playing today, no injury tag, I'd probably have him at number 10. So Taylor Rapp, again, not the sexiest play, but somebody who's just going to get you tackles. But at the same time, those 10 to 12 points, they're bankable. That matters more now than it ever did. So Taylor Rapp, I think he's going to play this week, at least one of them. I'd rather have Rapp play and own than Damar Hamlin. Rapp's been the more bankable tackler as of late. Hamlin's been inconsistent. But if neither of these guys play, I have no problem. I look at Taylor Rapp just like I look at Cole Bishop. Cole Bishop played 100% of snaps last week, had 8 tackles. Hey, that's a Damar Hamlin, that's a Taylor Rapp kind of stat line. So whatever one of these guys plays, one of them's going to play. I definitely would think it would be a top 15 defensive back play this week, especially versus New England. Great matchup. I'd mentioned New England's going to throw the ball. They've been improved over the last month or two. So I really like Cole Bishop or, of course, Taylor Rapp, Damar Hamlin, whichever one is starting. So keep an eye on injury reports, practice reports, and we will find you that answer, whoever it might be, coming up this weekend. So finally, some streamers for defensive backs. I had mentioned a cheat code here at the defensive back position. I think you want to, if you have room, other savvy owners might be onto this. So if you have room, say if you have a mid-grade kicker and you can drop him and pick up a kicker on Sunday and drop somebody, do that. Pick up Jalen Carlies because the second that if EJ Speed is ruled out, this is no longer a stream. This is a smash play. Jalen Carlies came in, undrafted rookie with 10 tackles, played 98% of snaps. Like, this is real. And again, any Colts linebacker who goes in there, who puts on the blue and white and plays in the middle, they can bang. I don't care if it's Shaq, Darius Leonard, if it's Zaire Franklin, down to Grant Stewart, whoever plays does well in Indianapolis for linebackers, racks up the tackles at least. So it's a beautiful thing. I love to see that. I love to say that. Carlos is somebody who is, you can put him at a linebacker, you can put him at safety in Yahoo leagues. I'm not sure about other designations, other leagues out there, but that's definitely my move in Yahoo. Especially if I'm in a deeper league, I'm going to pick up Carlies and stick him in as a defensive back. Not too many defensive backs that have a 10 tackle ability out there. So Carlies could be a huge payoff. Say if EJ Speed was out and I knew he was starting, and we're talking defensive backs, and you can put him there, I'd have him over Metellus. I'd have him over Derwin, Dogger. I'd probably have him maybe behind Kyle Hamilton. I think that's where yeah, probably about 7 is where I'd have him if you told me EJ Speed was out today. So that's the kind of potential I believe in him. Keep in mind, we were talking about when EJ Speed went out. Was it going to be Grant Stewart? So the fact that Carlisle's played 98% makes me pretty certain that he's going to start the next game if Speed's out. But nothing is guaranteed. To me, that's the only risk you play in this stream would be that, for some reason they switch up roles and they play Grant Stewart, more snaps. But the fact that Carlisle's played 98%, he had an interception, he showed what he can do, and he's going to get a nice extended look. This might be, a good opportunity to see if they're going to keep him and as a starter next year, because EJ Speed, frankly, is a free agent after this year. So Carlisle's is getting a nice audition for this year. If he gets that opportunity, the rookie's going to be hungry, and the rookie's going to ball if he gets that opportunity. So keep that in mind. Next is for the deepest of leagues. Please don't take me wrong. Please don't ask me, would I put him in the top 15 over any of these guys? I won't, because I put the top 15 in there already, and he's not in it. But Damani Richardson, if you're in a very, very deep league, yeah, he popped off in the middle of the year, 2 weeks. I believe he had 23 tackles, weeks 8 and 9 combined. So that was very encouraging. But I actually preached for people to start him. There was no word about it. Coaches just pulled him and put Jordan Fuller back in week 10. And that screwed a lot of people, screwed myself. So Damani Richardson, we're not going to get too cute here. If you're in a 12-team league, there's no need to play him. If you're starting 4 defensive backs and you're in a 12-league team, now we can start talking about Damani Richardson. But again, if you have anybody in this top 15, I'm not budging. I'm not going to advise you to play Damani Richardson unless I heard that he was playing 100% of snaps. And the way that Carolina has been as far as who's going to start, they don't tell you until 12:40 on a Sunday. Nobody knows till then. So no money in the bank with Damani Richardson. He played well. He should start. He should play close to 100%, but that's not given. So, as much as the upside is tantalizing, I would advise to steer away this week. And finally, last but not least, Quentin Lake. I had a tough time keeping him off this list. I know the recent production has slipped, although he kind of righted the ship last week versus Arizona in a good matchup. He had 7 tackles. It was versus the Jets last week. He had 7 tackles versus the Jets, and that was a bad matchup. So makes me think, you know what, when he gets Arizona this week and it's a top 8 matchup, I think he could actually do better. So Quentin Lake, don't forget about him. He's still playing 100% of snaps. Didn't miss his snap this whole year. So I don't think the bad box score output was due to anything, performance-based. I think that's just a bad matchup base. So Quentin Lake is a fine stream this week too. I have him right outside of my top 15. Don't forget about him. Don't try to pick somebody up that's playing 60% of snaps. Quentin Lake plays 100. Yeah, he might get you 8, but he might get you 17 as well. So keep that in mind. Play somebody who has 100% of snaps. Play somebody who has, you have some bankability, not somebody who just came out of the woodwork last week with 17 and, you're going to get burnt this week with a 3-piece. So that's why I'm here, though. If you have any questions, ask away. I appreciate it. This is my last episode. It's been a long season. I'm tired. I appreciate you guys. You guys give me fuel to the fire, help me, make my research and do this every week. So hats off to all of you, and thank you to all of you who subscribed, who gave me nice remarks in the show. And once again, if you're up to betting, I will stop this right here. The trends. I'm not going to do the week 18. This is going to be my last show doing these rankings, but check me out if you haven't already. Me and Axton, we do a nice betting show. We've been 74% with our picks over the last month, so that we do 4 picks each. So 8 picks. We give you 8 defensive props every week on IDP Plus bets. Usually that video comes out around Friday or Saturday, the weekend, usually right around when the prop bets come out on DraftKings. So check out IDP Plus bets. Look for my show on there, Tackle Props. Until next time, anything else you want to follow me on Twitter? I'm on Twitter at JohnnyFreakinF1. But any other questions you have, hit me up. whether it be on this video or on Twitter, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So, hey, once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for rocking with me, and we will see you next time on IDP Plus Trends.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.